Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Fortified Life podcast, where we are passionate about developing a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. I'm your host, Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify. Every week, we have the opportunity to have on authors, speakers, coaches, leaders of nonprofits who are also passionate about putting God back in business. And it is no different this week, folks. I'm really excited for our guest today, but let me introduce her to you. Dee Ann Turner, three-time best-selling author, acclaimed keynote speaker, and a 33-year veteran of Chick-Fil-A. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fortified Life podcast, Dee Ann Turner. Dee Ann, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes. Well, Deanne, I know that, folks, I'm telling you, you need to check her out. When you look at all of your experience and everything God has graced you to do, Deanne, it is extensive for sure, and it is impressive. We also know, Deanne, that you just didn't wake up in 2026 and you're this best-selling, three-time best-selling author. You're traveling all over speaking. Take us on the journey. How did you get here?
Life is a series of decisions that gets you to that point when you wake up one day and you say, how I got here. And some of them are, hopefully, most of them are really great decisions. A few times we make bad ones and we have to recover from that. But I look at that and it's really just been a series of decisions and a lot of God's blessings. When I went off to a Christian college, Cincinnati Christian University. I wanted to be a journalist. I actually wanted to be specifically a writer. I wanted to write books. And I met my husband and we got married. He was a pastor and we moved back to the Atlanta area. And I was working for an organization with toxic culture. They didn't even call it that back then because that was more common than a remarkable culture at that time in business. It's just the way that it was. And I started looking for a job and I ended up, it was actually my husband that recommended to me to apply at Chick-fil-A. And it was a long and arduous process. I finally, after months of interviewing, was offered a job and I'd applied for a job in advertising, but I ended up taking a job in human resources. So my first critical decision was marrying my husband, Ashley, who's been a tremendous helpmate for me. The second critical decision that I made at that time in my life was going to Chick-fil-A. And the third one was accepting that job in human resources instead of where I thought I wanted to be, which was in marketing. And so
Mm,
those three decisions really shaped what happened for the next 40 or so years to wherever we are now. And I did go to work in human resources, a little disappointed with myself because remember, I wanted to write books from the time I was 8 years old. But at that time in my life, I didn't have a lot of responsibility. At that time, I didn't have a lot of experience to be a writer. So I went to work in human resources and really worked my way up. I was an administrator when I started. I caught some people would say lucky breaks. I would just say blessings that I had opportunities. I was part of Chick-fil-A it wasn't a startup, but it was a very small entrepreneurial family-owned company, 150 locations doing 175 million in sales, which it still sounds like a lot, but compared to today where Chick-fil-A is probably knocking on the door 25, 30 billion with
goodness.
3,000+ restaurants, it's grown quite a bit since then. So I grew up with Chick-fil-A and I had lots of opportunities because of that. That's not to say it was easy. It was very challenging. I had a lot to learn and went back to school to learn some things I needed to learn. But soon 30 years had passed and I was ready to start writing. And I wrote my first book in 2015. It was published. It's My Pleasure. And that book was a bestseller. And I worked for 3 more years with Chick-fil-A and then had an opportunity to retire along with 100 of my good buddies at Chick-fil-A who had been there a long time. And I had a contract for 2 more books sitting on my desk, and I had a decision to make. Was I going to stay at Chick-fil-A? And I really couldn't write and promote 2 more books as an officer of the company. And I decided that it was time for me to take that leap that God had provided me. And of course, without those 33 years at Chick-fil-A, and specifically without the wonderful Chick-fil-A operators that have created this amazing brand that people care about, I wouldn't have that opportunity to do that. So just another blessing along the way. But another important decision, I didn't know how it was going to work out. I would have never dreamed that 7.5 years later, you and I would be having this conversation. I thought by now I'd be on a beach somewhere relaxing. But what I found out is a lot of people were now interested in how do you create a remarkable culture? How do you select
Mm,
extraordinary talent? How do you teach that talent to provide amazing customer experiences? And so I've spent the last 7.5 years teaching organizations all over the world how to do that. And I, Jason, am such a blessed woman that I get to do that.
wow. Dee Ann, you said so many powerful things there. I love how you narrowed it down to three critical decisions: choosing the right mate, making the right decision to go to the right organization, Chick-fil-A, and then I always think of right person on the right bus. So you pick the right lane. And I'm curious, Deanne, and it's widely known about Chick-fil-A's culture, but you being there that long, everybody says, "Oh man, Chick-fil-A is awesome." Being on the inside, I mean, what is so great about the culture that you just see just a pipeline of leadership development? I mean, there's so many people that have gone on to be authors and trainers and speakers, and they're raising more up from the next generation to come up and be operators and work in the corporate office. So what is it? How do you get a culture to just be that enduring?
Well, it all started with one man's conviction to his
Mm,
purpose. And that was Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. And, when you decide what your purpose is and you consistently live it out day after day, year after year to the people around you, it's infectious and contagious. And that's what Truett did. He determined that his purpose and that Chick-fil-A's purpose was to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us and to be a positive influence of all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And he ran his business like that. He believed that there was no conflict in good business principles and running a business on biblical principles. And so that's what he did, treating people the way you want to be treated. And he multiplied himself in other people and focused. He started by, selecting the next generation of leaders. He held really high standards, as you can imagine. And people met those standards because they believed in being part of something bigger than themselves. And that's really what's behind all of that. And then I think in a lot of ways it took on a life of its own. I mean, when you keep attracting purpose-driven people that are committed into that way, and then they bring their own innovations, especially I think at Chick-fil-A franchisees, because they're independent and they take that and what they do in their own communities and the way they positively influence both their team members and their customers and their communities. And that just gets multiplied again and again and again. So for Truett, one of the really important things was who do you select as leaders? And the most important decision we make are people decisions. And for Chick-fil-A, the most important decision we made was who we gave the keys to the restaurant to, because that's the brand. How those people interact and serve their communities impacts every other franchisee in the chain. So that decision was the most critical one that we made. And it was one that Truett made sure that we put all the resources necessary to make good decisions in that area.
such a awesome man. I remember Deanne. One time I had the pleasure of meeting Truett, and I didn't even know it was him at the time. Quick story, Chick-fil-A is such a big sponsor of a lot of different events, and we were at the Chick-fil-A Bowl in 2000, I think it was 2008. And I was sitting at the table. It was the banquet. I played at Georgia Tech. We were playing LSU. And an older gentleman put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "What does the cow say?" Eat more chicken. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Oh, okay, haha." And I see some Chick-fil-A officials. He walks away, and about 3 minutes later, all these suits walk over and they're like, "Hey, young man, you know who that was, right?" And I was like, "No, I have no idea." They're like, that was our founder, Truett Cathy. So I say all that to share. That's just one that I only met him briefly, but it's really cool, that interaction I had, and that speaks to what you spending 33 years at Chick-fil-A. So that's just so amazing to have worked and served alongside him. One of the other things you said, Deanne, was choosing to work in HR. And You held that intention with marketing. What was the tipping point that said, you know what? Not marketing.
Well, that is really a funny story because I had a brief stint in advertising. I told you I worked in an organization with a toxic culture, and I did what a lot of journalism majors do when they can't go, they go into advertising.
Mhm.
So I did not enjoy the firm side of that where it was so cutthroat, and I wanted to get on the client side. So that's what I was pursuing at Chick-fil-A. And I actually was going to have that opportunity. I really did choose human resources. And the part of it I chose is I, I a lot of variety. I enjoy change. And so I thought, well, this will give me something different. I'll have a different experience. And plus, I really liked those people. And you know how friendly they are when you're in the recruiting process. So I was like, I like those people. So I'll go
Yeah.
do this a couple of years. And then I'll go to marketing. I'll know where the jobs are and I'll go back to that career path. But God intervened in the midst of all that, and there's some things that happened. One is the man who selected me, he resigned 18 months after I came to work there. But during those 18 months, he had taught me a lot, and I was already on a path. And one of the things that I was really enjoying was I was creating systems. We had no systems whatsoever for selecting the staff people that worked what they called the home office. Now they call it the support center. But we had no systems for that. And so that's what I was working on was creating those systems. And so when he resigned, they weren't really quite sure what to do with me. They had a lot of different options that they kept considering. And then finally they said, well, we think she's doing something important, so we're going to leave her in this role. So
Mhm.
they promoted me and I continued to do that work. And then not long after that, I was assigned what was one of my favorite jobs ever, recruiting Chick-fil-A franchisees, which was actually sort of a marketing job. And
Mm.
especially in those days, because Chick-fil-A was not well known outside of the Southeast. And I had the Northeast. That was my region, the Northeast, the region of the country. And so I was spending time in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and places where they were calling it Chick-fil-A and Chick-fil-A and all kinds of things, and having the opportunity to tell the story of Chick-fil-A and attract franchisees. And then after I did the recruiting role, I was brought back in and I actually was responsible for the selection of these franchisees, which was just a blast because it was always putting a puzzle together, finding the right leader who could build relationships with the team, who could influence a community, who was strategic, who, was purpose driven, all of those things, finding just the right person for each opportunity. So I really loved that job. And there was a point when I just kind of paused and thought, what, am I doing what God called me to do? Am I in the right spot? And then I realized what it was that I loved about my role. And I discovered that my calling was helping other people find their calling. And Jason, to this day, that's exactly what I'm still doing. And it's a lifelong journey and mission for me, whether it's what I write about or what I speak about or what I coach about. That's what I continue to help people do.
Wow. From systems to recruiting and selection. And that kind of brings us to your speaking as a keynote speaker and then also a three-time best-selling author. So you have all this great experience at Chick-fil-A. You wrote the first book and now you're launch out. And now for the last 7 years, you've been going all over the country, all over the world. So what are some of your signature talks that you give? You've mentioned there's a key word. I was listening. I've heard you say remarkable a couple of times, and I have a sneaky suspicion that that might be a topic of yours.
Well, I talk about remarkable cultures because that's where it all starts. And that's what Truett did at Chick-fil-A. And I was part of his team that helped put all that together and define that and give language to it for the organization. And so I talk to organizations about defining what their meaningful purpose is, what their challenging mission is, what their demonstrated core values are, because that's how I define culture. And so that is a big part of my focus. And another thing I did as a leading talent at Chick-fil-A, obviously, was I selected thousands of franchisees and home office staff members. And so I talk a lot about the process of doing that and how you can select extraordinary talent for your organization. And then the third thing that I spend a lot of time on is customer experience. And really, customer experience comes from marrying those two things, creating a remarkable culture, selecting extraordinary talent, and then teaching, training, motivating that talent to create amazing customer experiences. And so primarily, I spend a lot of time doing that. I also talk about servant leadership. I have an interesting role we haven't talked about too. I have they call it the Access to Innovators program at High Point University, which is an executive and residence type program that I've been involved in now for 4 years. So I spend a lot of time with young people and I really enjoy that. But I'm on campus a couple of times a year helping them think about their career and how to navigate that. So that's where my second book was Bet on Talent, which was all about the things I described to you, what I talk to leaders about. And then Crush Your Career is really the flip side of that book. And it's talking to the talent about how to be extraordinary. And so
Mm.
teaching those young people how to do that. And that brings me a lot of great joy to spend that time with them and watch the next generation grow.
So good, Deanne, working with the next generation. And then just, I mean, these are key things that businesses need to hear for sure. Deanne, in your experience, in 2026, there's all this discussion about AI. So let me time travel a little bit, Deanne. We had, you had the industrial revolution back in the day. Then you had, the telephone, the onset of the internet, the radio, somewhere in between, and now here comes AI. And there's this technology and tools piece, and then you have the humans piece. What are you hearing from companies? What are you seeing, and what are you encouraging them to do? Because it's almost like there's this wrestling that's begun to take place with the innovation that's going on with AI.
Sure. Well, there's no doubt that there are processes and systems that can be augmented and even replaced by AI. And it's a good business tool. It wasn't so long ago that we had a huge labor shortage for a long time. And that drove part of the innovation of where we are now. We had to replace humans to some extent because we didn't have enough labor to do certain roles. On the other hand, I don't believe a technology can replace the genuine human touch. So people who want to be valuable in the future, they're not just going to have a set of competencies that honestly can be replaced by artificial intelligence, but they're going to work on their relationship building skills because that's is the hardest thing to replicate is true relationship, right? I'm not even sure it can. I'm not saying it can't yet, but I do question if it really can. So there will always be a need for leaders who can build relationships. So to me, that's one of the focus: communication skills and relationship building for future leaders. That's what you're focusing on because that was awfully hard to replicate by a machine. But lots of other things can be. And so it definitely shifts. I think a lot about the talent more so than the organization, actually. I'm thinking about people, I guess because I have three they're getting older, but young adult sons,
Mhm.
and I think about their future and how do you ensure that you have a positive career path in the wake of this technology? And how do you use it positively and appropriately, but at the same time, don't rely on it so much that you become irrelevant yourself. So that's my thought about from a talent standpoint. From an organizational standpoint, I think a lot about it as a customer because I have so many poor customer experiences with organizations using AI to replace people. And, one of the problems is I'm really against a rules based culture because rules are yes or no. People can't find the gray when you set rules. Now, if you run an organization based on principles, you give people principles, they can put on their own thinking caps, as we used to say, and come up with creative solutions to help people. But if you give somebody a rule book, which is what you have to do with that, there's no gray area. And that's where we
Right.
miss it in customer experience oftentimes because there's not a human there to stop and think, okay, wait a minute, that makes no sense to do that way, right? And so I think at organizations looking at that again, there's great systems out there and there's things that you can use that to be more efficient and to move faster because we always have to keep moving faster these days. But don't move so fast that you leave your customers behind because I don't care how good your AI is. If you don't have great customer experiences, you won't last.
Yeah, that's good. You raised so many great points, Deanne. Deanne, with your so much experience in developing systems and then recruiting and selection, What have you noticed? Are there any patterns or key characteristics or qualities that you've noticed over the years? These things keep showing up, these really awesome employees. If you had a list of maybe 3 to 5 traits, what have you found that was so effective in people being able to make great hires in recruiting and selection?
First of all, is a servant spirit. And sometimes that word is not appreciated so much, but that's really what it is, a willingness to serve, whoever it is. I love, Simon Sinek wrote the book Leaders Eat Last. And that's what leadership is putting others before yourself. If you're a leader, you're in service to the people who support you, you're in service to the customer, you're in service to those who run your organization. So willingness to serve. And everybody, I don't care if you're the CEO, you serve somebody, you're responsible for that. So I think that's number one. That differentiates people. They have a humble spirit, willing to serve. I think another thing that differentiates, especially today, is work ethic. Just willing to sacrifice and work hard. And I'm seeing this among the young people, those who go the extra mile, who don't mind it there in the office at 6 o'clock, don't mind being the first to come and the last to leave. And I'm not talking about lack of balance in life. I'm just talking about genuinely working hard, even willing to be in the office versus being remote. That genuine focus on my employer's paying me and I'm giving them everything I've got while I'm on the clock with them. That makes a difference these days because not everybody's doing that.
Yeah.
People are a little bit more interested in what's in it for me rather than, okay, I'm going to give you everything I've got. So I think that whole work ethic and just a willingness to work hard differentiates. And then the third thing I would pick out is communication skills. You can have great competencies, but if you're not able to communicate what that is, both orally and verbally and in writing. So, people sometimes question, hey, what good is a college degree anymore? I think I do this. One thing I encourage you to focus on when you're in college is become a great reader and a great writer if you're not already, because those are really important skills that you're going to carry with you whatever you do in life. From getting your job to keeping your job to growing in your job, those are really important skills. So communication. And then probably the fourth thing is that whole relational ability. And it comes out in different ways, being curious about other people, caring about other people, being interested in other people, not so me focused, but recognizing things get done because people work together. So I have to be able to work with other people. And I do that by building strong relationships with my teammates, with my subordinates, with my customers, with my vendors, with everybody I work with. That's just a really important skill. So those four highlight my list of what I look for in most any role for great talent.
Listeners, I hope you were taking notes. The Dee Ann just gave the blueprint right there for sure. Dee Ann, we are in March. We're coming up on the spring. The flowers are getting ready to bloom again. What are you excited about in 2026? You got any upcoming exciting events? Are you working on something? I don't want to get you in trouble if you're working on something new, but if you're able to divulge, feel free. But yeah, what are you excited about coming up in 2026?
Well, there's a lot. First of all, I have some really exciting speaking engagements. I just got back a great one in Washington, D.C. with the Sustainability and Food and Beverage Summit up there. And that was a great experience with those folks. And I'm headed to the International Car Wash Association in May. And I hear that is a lot of fun. Everybody tells me that is such a fun conference. So I've been visiting car wash franchises. My car is starting to look really good, Jason, because I'm spending a lot of time learning. I actually have learned a lot about the car wash business that I had no idea how much it's grown and all the different options you have now and so forth. So that's a lot of fun. And I'm going to be with Lexus later in the summer. And I was with Volkswagen last year, had such a great time with them. So I'm really looking forward to being with Lexus later this summer. So lots of things going on, lots of things in the works there. And Jason, I'm going to tell you something I'm not told anybody else yet. Because I guess I haven't quite admitted it, but since I'm 10 chapters in, I'm writing a new book. And
Hmm.
this came about in a real interesting way. They always say when you write a book, you have an audience. So when I wrote It's My Pleasure, my audience was all of Chick-fil-A. That was my love letter to Chick-fil-A. When I wrote Bet on Talent, my specific audience was Chick-fil-A operators. That's who I had in mind to help them figure out how to build a remarkable culture and what extraordinary talent provide great customer experiences. Trust Your Career. Our youngest son was in college, going through that process of finding his career path, getting that first job, launching himself. And so he was who I wrote that book to. And he was actually my litmus test. He proved that the book worked and he went every step of the way. Well, recently, our middle son was promoted to his first leadership role. And I found myself just flooded with all these leadership lessons. I want him so badly to be successful. So I start sending him these letters. And then I realized, when I'm on lesson 29, it's like, Dee Ann, you're writing a book. And so I've got to step back now and write the proposal and the outline and all that. But I think I'm going to do it. I've already started into chapter 10. I've written about half the book, 25,000 words. So I'm
Wow.
going to back up and pursue that. And I think it'll take me most of the year to do that. So I'm excited about that, needless to say.
Well, folks, keynotes galore. Dee Ann's going to be hitting the road speaking, and you heard it here first on the Fortified Life. She's going to be working on another book, so I know I can't wait for that, Dee Ann. You've already got a buyer here in me. I look forward to reading that when you complete it.
I'll have to
Excited.
come back. I'll have to come back and we'll discuss it. Well, now
Yes,
you might
yes.
have to be a pre-reader for me, Jason, and tell me what you
Okay,
think of it too.
that sounds good. I'm happy to do that.
Great.
Yeah, uh, Deanne, speaking of the books, your three existing books, where's the best place people can go to get a copy of your first three books?
Okay. Well, first of all, It's My Pleasure is no longer in print, so don't go seek that. It's on
Okay.
Amazon, and sometimes it's as much as $150. Do not buy that book, and here's why. All the content in that book, plus more, is in Bet on Talent. So that's the book you want to
Mm,
buy. And you can get that on any online retailer, or you can get it at deanturner.com on my website. Crush Your Career, same way. Any online retailer now. It just came out in paperback too. So you have those options. You can get it on e-reader and go to Amazon or go to my website, turner.com, and you can find all of my books and more.
I love it. Well, folks, what you don't know is I originally learned about Deanne on LinkedIn. A lot of activities, she's got speaking highlights and whatnot. So, Deanne, what's the best way you like for listeners to connect with you and stay up with all the awesome stuff you're doing with your books, keynote speaking, and training, coaching, all of it?
I do invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to be your connection, and that's a great place to find me. I also have a Facebook page, Dee Ann Turner Author is how you can find me there. And then also on Instagram at Dee Ann Turner. So that DeeAnn Turner, Turner.
Love it. Well, folks, you heard directly from her. You know where to find her. We'll have all of Deanne's information in the show notes, jerichoforce.com/podcast, and we'll have all her information in the show notes. Deanne, I can't tell you how wonderful this has been, and I would love to have you back when the new book comes out. And I'd love to read it too. He said in pre-production, I'd be happy to do that. But Deanne, I've had so much fun you hanging out with us here on the Fortified Life.
Well, thank you, Jason. It's truly been my pleasure, and I've enjoyed talking with you today.
Excellent. Well, folks, we've got to let Deanne get back to conquering the world, one keynote and one book at a time. That's all we have time for here on the Fortified Life. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the show, the Fortified Life podcast on all podcast platforms of choice, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and then our YouTube channel for our YouTube audience who's watching us, the Fortified Life on YouTube. You know how we end things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. We'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.